Victor and I sit in the waiting room. His foot taps nervously, and I nestle into the seat next to his. A while ago, he commented that the Frulajek women who showed us in here looked like a Draenei, which is apparently a race from a centuries-old Terran media franchise, but he hasn't said anything since then. She just looked like a relatively normal Frulajek female to me. Frulajeks are somewhat dissimilar to Terrans. It is curious that the variety of life on Earth means that Terrans have an apt animal to compare half the sapiens they encounter with, and the variety of their imaginings cover the other half. Most garden worlders have no more than a few hundred unique animal species, compared to the millions of animals that call Earth their home. To Terrans, Wakwali are secretary birds, Rejef are giant squid, Shouuso are pink elephants. The notion of creating an imaginary race purely for entertainment would be concerning to a garden worlder, without familiarity with Terrans. Just then, another testament to the rich tapestry of Terra enters the room. She's a Neanderthal woman who stands noticeably shorter than even Jenny, though what she lacks in height, she more than makes up for in bulk. I don't believe I've ever seen a more solidly built human. Her face is expressionless and utter monotone, as she strides up to Victor and says, "Stand up, I need to frisk you." Victor's face breaks with recognition. "I know you, you're Fran Gimli Hunter, the galaxy's strongest unaugmented woman." She gives no reaction to the recognition, positive or negative, as she says, "Please stand up so I can frisk you." Still clearly starstruck, Victor stands and spreads his limbs. She roughly passes her hands over his lower portion and then hesitates. The 0.5 meter height differential is such that, if she wants to reach his shoulders, she needs to get close enough for a full body contact. Her face shows no discomfort, but Victor, wordlessly, kneels for her to complete her frisk. That done, she turns her mossy green eyes to me, and, terrified about what a frisk from potentially the galaxy's strongest unaugmented woman might mean for my fragile bones, I stand, spread my wings out, and complete a full circle to reveal that I am concealing no weaponry. I truly hope that satisfies her. It seems to. She jerks her head to indicate that we are to follow. Victor lowers his hand to a level where I can step onto it, then raises it, allowing me to step to resume my perch on his shoulder. We walk down the high-ceilinged corridor behind the powerfully built woman. It's somewhat ludicrous that we needed to be searched for weaponry, despite the fact that we passed through a detector on the way in and were, at that point, informed that the whole building is monitored by an AI, who will sound an alarm if any unauthorized weaponry is detected inside. Belts and braces is the expression I believe Victor would use. It can't hurt to be sure. The stocky woman indicates a door before saying, "I'll be waiting out here. If I hear sounds of distress or the activation of the privacy field, I will enter with intent to neutralize," in a flat monotone that leaves little doubt as to the meaning of the word neutralize. Victor and I smile and nod, though my smile, unlike his, is definitely colored by fear. We walk through the door and are met by the sight of an uncannily familiar Terran that I'm certain I've never met before. She wears a sort of robe? Dress? She wears an outfit which is an assortment of greens that glisten with an iridescent luster, and very peculiar shoes that seem to have the style of sandals, but with a base carved from what looks like wood and raised on downward protrusions towards the front and back. She has pale skin and jet black hair, though with either dyed or modified grey streaks emanating from the top of her hairline to the back of her tightly tied coiffure. Her eyes are a vivid purple, though she's certainly not her Tishuan. Those must be modifications, surely. With regen tech now ubiquitous across Terran space, I can't be certain as to whether she's 25 or 125, but she certainly has the bearing of an old woman. She stands, and Victor bends to allow me off his shoulder. "So, these are the pilots of the ODR's Terran Security Officer program? I've heard excellent things about both of you from my sister," speaks the woman, radiating self-confidence. What is she talking about? Whose sister might she be to have heard good things about us? I quickly run through all of the human triple M's, and rule them out as likely candidates for one reason or another. Given that this is Messiah's planet, he would be the most likely candidate, but he's male, and from what I know of human ethnicity, none of them look like they share a close biological relationship with this woman. My mind is spared the effort of graunching under the strain of attempting to resolve the enigma by Victor saying, "You're Emiko, Miyazaki's little sister." The mystery woman smiles and nods, making her no longer a mystery. She is now Emiko, though I'm not quite sure of the implications of that. My mind is still reeling somewhat. She notices my befuddlement and says, "I'm sorry, dear. I can see I perplexed you. Why don't the two of you take a seat and we can begin? our indirect relationship to each other has little bearing, but I'll go for it so it's not bothering anyone. Victor sits in the human-adapted chair. I climb atop the Rquali-adapted perch, and Emiko resumes her seat behind the desk, with a Zanzibari vista visible through the window behind her. Emiko, Ms. Miyazaki starts, Mr. Taylor is right. I'm Emiko Miyazaki. Gian and I share a father, though we were born on different planets, about 14 years apart, and never had a real-time conversation until after the peace made FTL comms available across Terran space. While she was overseeing Mr. Taylor's piloting of the SO position, she and I talked about him, his Rquali sponsor, and the program rather a lot. I feel like I already know the two of you quite well, though entirely parasocially. Do either of you have any further questions about any of that? Having recovered from the blindsiding, I answer, You've covered it quite well. I look to Victor. I think both of us are more interested in the contract your employer is offering, right, Victor? He nods. Very well, smiles Miyazaki, tapping a holopad to darken the window behind her before flicking a video to the display on the wall to her left. My and Victor's right. This is footage that was captured by a long-distance, semi-true AI-piloted probe, surveying an unnamed Death Rod in the Outer Rim, and relayed to the ODR Central Office on Citadel around 7 months ago. Please watch. The footage shows a snowy forest of pine-like trees. It must have either been captured in the hemisphere's winter, or the whole planet simply has a frigid climate. The trees clear, revealing the brow of a hill. What makes us think this could be a sapiens-bearing planet is just coming up, informs Miyazaki. The footage crests the hill and unveils a broad valley, also heavily forested, but in the middle of this valley is a hill, with a clear patch of land topping it, and at the center of that patch is what looks like a village. A village that appears to be made of white woven cloth. It's somewhat difficult to pick it out from the snow until the camera magnifies the image to reveal dwellings with large, indistinct dark shapes moving between them. I mean, that ain't conclusive. Building shelter is far from sufficient to determine sapience. Tons of animals build shelters, opines Victor, the side of his face showing a contemplative frown. Wait for it? Smirks Miyazaki. A few more moments pass before a loud crack sounds to the footage, and the video is suddenly showing only overcast sky. Victor sits bolt upright. His body is tense, as if he is readying for action. I'm rather at a loss. A moment more and the footage cuts out. Bloody hell, swears Victor. Miyazaki nods knowingly. Looking between these two who clearly know something I don't, I say, Would one of you care to enlighten me? Victor turns to me, his face blanched. Those probes are built like tanks, Cap. The shells them more like 1.5 centimeters of Durasteel. The same stuff Terran's armor's built out of. Most Death Rod animals are wary of them because they're unfamiliar and don't look particularly appetizing. It actually makes studying zoology using them quite difficult. Something managed to sneak up on that probe and take it out, without being seen. I mean, it ain't impossible that it was just an uncharacteristically brazen and stealthy animal. It ain't impossible that it was a 1 in a billion fluke, like it got hit by a meteorite or whatever, but it sort of seems like, when you put it together with the settlement it captured footage of, something was tracking that probe, identified it as a threat, and met it with sufficient force to destroy it. That's much more convincing than the village. Miyazaki nods appreciatively at Victor. Someone's done their homework, or is an avid fanboy of the search for Death Rod sapiens. Victor's face flushes. I ask, so where is this planet? Wishing to distract from the embarrassment that Victor is, for whatever reason, feeling about his unusual level of knowledge on the ODR's probes. In answer, Miyazaki pulls up a 3D protection of the entire galaxy from her holopad. That's not a good sign. Here, says Miyazaki, indicating a red dot on the outer end of the Orion Singer's arm, is where we are now, Zanzibar Papaya. This? She changes the display to highlight a mostly continuous area, largely in that arm of the galaxy, but spilling over to the arm we just came from, and the next one along as well, as having a few exclaves from more intrepid settlements further out, and a few enclaves from garden worlders that happen to be located within it, is Terran space. This, she highlights a dot in yellow, almost precisely on the opposite side of the galaxy, is survey planet AG10790263b. That's the planet we're after. We've left it unnamed as, with the possibility of it being sapiens-bearing, we want to give the natives the chance to name it themselves, if there are any. Both Victor's and my faces fell. That's a year's journey from here, comments Victor dejectedly. Miyazaki gives a mirthless smile. Did you think it would be a brief jaunt over to the next galactic arm? that you'd be laughing along with your new Death Order friends in a matter of weeks? I interrupt here. Miss Miyazaki, that was uncalled for. We've come here in good faith to listen to the ODR's proposal and not to be insulted. Her face momentarily shows surprise before she rights herself. My apologies, Captain. I can see I crossed a line. I meant no offense. My sister did tell me that you can be rather fierce when the occasion strikes. I must admit, do not fully believe in it until now. I give a satisfied Terran nod. I think my CSS's reaction has a little more to do with the fact that this is almost as inconvenient a place as we could wish to start from. Much as I don't wish to pass on this contract, are there not more conveniently placed Death Order research ships? Ones located closer to this planet? She smiles and nods. There are, but, well, after what happened the first time the GU made contact with a Death World, the ODR is determined not to make any mistakes this time. We want the best. You are the best. I cock a brow tuft. The best? In answer, Miyazaki flicks a spreadsheet to the display on the wall. This is your ship's incident report log filed with the ODR. There are precisely 394 incidents reported since the start of Victor's tenure aboard. Roughly one every 8 Terran days on average. Everything from mild stomachache resultant from consumption of unidentified Death World berries to mauling from Death World fauna. I frown. That's a strange way of defining best, Miss Miyazaki. She smiles and shakes her head, flicking another, nearly empty log to the display. Not when we compare it to the list of fatalities from the same period. There is only one name on this list. Researcher Halb, who died in his bed of heart failure around 3 years ago. I still remember Victor and his people's bright white mourning colours as we cremated Halb. It hit him quite hard. One death in nearly a decade, and not even mission-related. That's so good that we've audited you several times thinking you had to be covering up fatalities. If you are, we've not found any indication of it. Also, your last report indicated that you'd hired not only additional SOs, but non-security Terran staff as well. Your ship is a shining example of what is possible when Death Warders and Garden Warders collaborate. I also can't pretend that there isn't a political aspect to this as well. The original pilots of the ODR's SO qualification, being the ones to convey ODR representation on a Death Ward first contact, it would be a moderate propaganda coup. There's also the fact that you just arrested a crew of pirates to consider. My face and Victor's screw up in mild disgust. I know, says Miyazaki, with a placatory wave of her hand. I don't like being a woman who has to consider the public perception of things like this. I didn't do a degree and a doctorate after the war was concluded to be worried about politics. However, there is still a persistent issue with people rejecting the ODR's prescriptions as governmental overreach. The better we're perceived, the less likely it is that Garden World captains decide that Death World research is lucrative enough to get into, and damn it if they're going to be told they need to Terran with their excursion parties. A good image saves lives. Seeing the sense in what this woman is saying, but still not liking being used as a poster girl, I ask, so, would it be you we are to convey to this planet, Dr. Miyazaki? She raises a finger and says, if it's alright with you, please just call me Emiko. Dr. Miyazaki was my father. And yes, she winks, only the best. Victor gives an excited jerk, causing me to start, and exclaims, is that why you're under guard by Fran Hunter? Is she going to come too? Dr. Miyazaki, Emiko, laughs through her nose and says, just so, Mr. Taylor, I can see you're familiar with her exploits as a bodybuilder, though if you're looking to seduce her, I don't believe you'll have much luck. Victor shakes his head with a frown and says, is a guy not capable of admiring a woman without it being constructed romantically? I'm merely a fan, is all. I'm quite happily paired already, thank you very much. I'm unsure whether I should interject, but decide to back him up. His partner is about as far from Miss Hunter as is possible to get while remaining humanoid. I know that humans are capable of eclectic taste, but my intuition, for whatever it's worth, is that he's telling the truth about not having that sort of interest in Miss Hunter. Miyazaki laughs heartily. All right then, with that vouching, I have no further worry about things becoming awkward. Mr. Taylor? Nodding, I continue. So we would likely need to reinforce several doors to be Death Order resistant. We've only got one so far. I mean, we have 34 dorms and command quarters, so that's about 360 private rooms. Only around 200 of which are currently filled, but we only have one which is reinforced. 10 rooms, half of which are currently occupied. It would be less if not for the fact that Terrans have a proclivity to couple up and, having done so, move in with each other. I assume you'll want to bring more than just yourself and Miss Hunter. I assume you'll also want space to accommodate any Death World delegations we might bring to the Parliament and Citadel? She smiles, seeming pleased. Very perceptive, Captain. The full complement of staff we'll be bringing has not yet been determined. If you refuse this contract, we will likely have to start from the ground up with our second choice, located in an entirely different part of the galaxy, so we haven't actually approached anyone who doesn't already work for us yet. It would likely be around 15 Terran staff, with a similar number of ODR garden worlders who would be sharing their dorms. Then we would want 2 dorms per delegation from this new dev world, if the stars align for that. We'll pay all expenses for those upgrades. We can hire crew to have it done in less than 3 weeks. I smile. My maintenance team are extremely good, Dr. Emiko. I'm sure it wouldn't take them much longer than that themselves, but if you can find people who are happy to work alongside and take advice from garden welders, I would be happy to take you up on that contract. She nods. I'll see to it. Oh, and when the contract is complete, you can keep the upgrades. We won't send repossessions officers to tear out all the valuable parts we gave you. Think of it as a perk. Speaking of, you'll want to know what your remuneration is going to be like for this job. I smile. I fully disclose my ship's earnings to the ODR as well as the Jew's tax collection. I'm guessing you wouldn't have invited us here if you couldn't afford us. She smirks. Quite so, before flicking something from a holopad to mine, which I unclip to check. The figure nearly knocks me off my perch. This is twice what we would make in the same period as you're proposing to engage us for. With a look of smug satisfaction, she says, when you're employing the best, you can't be cheap. 50% of that up front, the rest on completion, an additional 25% again on top of that figure, with successful contact with natives of AG 107-90263B. Swallowing slightly, I look to Victor. His eyes are light with hope. I say, Ma'am, I very much want to accept this contract right here and now, but I can't speak for all of my crew. I shall have to fully disclose the details and put this to a general vote when I get back. I don't imagine it will be rejected, what with the baseline level of valiance I select for in my new hires, plus the quantity of hazard pay I'll be able to offer alongside it, but I won't go against my crew if they decide this isn't worth it. Is that acceptable? She frowns and nods. That's fine, Captain, but we aren't ready to disclose the potential fate for sapiens bearing Deathworld, besides Earth, yet. I'm afraid that if you want to put this to a vote, it will need to go along with an NDA. I can send you the wording of the NDA we've been using. Is that acceptable? Satisfied, I say. If it's the same one I had to sign to read the offer in the first place, then I already have it. There's no problem at all. She smiles. Well then, if you'll allow me, I'll give the 2 of you the full brief on AG 107-902-63B. She pulls up some complicated-looking charts. As you can see, its atmosphere is approximately 19% oxygen, similar to Earth's. However, unlike Earth's. One extremely lengthy brief later, Victor walks from the building with me perched on his shoulder. He's clearly lost in thought. My own head is still swimming. I extend my wing to rest my wing claws on the top of his head. How are you feeling, Victor? He frowns. Like it's too good to be true. Like this can't be that perfect, like someone's playing with me somehow. He sits down on a low wall. Like, what if it was just social animals that probe was looking at, and a freak accident that destroyed it? Terrans truly are emotional, but that's something to love them for. I hop down and turn to look him in the face. Victor, I can't promise that we will be the ones who find another planet of Deathworlders. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps those shelters were erected by animals acting on instinct, rather than people acting on inspiration. Perhaps we go out there and find nothing. If we do you think you can survive it? Will you consider it a waste of time to have taken this contract if we find nothing? He fixes me with those emerald eyes and says, You're right, Cap. It ain't worth working myself into a tizzy over what might happen. I'll survive if this turns out to be a disappointment, and whatever happens, it won't have been a waste of time. I smile and wink before hopping back atop his shoulder. Let's go, Victor. We have a vote to compose.